88.3 WXOU. This is Sports Talk with Puckett and Pontzer. We are live from the basement of the Oakland Center at Oakland University, the finest institution in the state. We are going to be talking some Oakland basketball. They actually did get invited to the CIT, contrary to Tim's points from last week. Mm-hmm. And we're going to be breaking down the NHL a little bit with some Red Wings talk. And then, obviously, we're going to get into March Madness, which is the thing to talk about right now. But we're gonna start with Oakland. Oakland got invited to play in the CIT. Usually you need 17 wins to get into that tournament, but they're one of two teams, I believe, that has 16 wins and is going to be participating in the event. They're going to play at Youngstown State actually tonight at 7 o'clock p.m. Tim, what are your thoughts on them getting in, and what do you think about it?
Well, I mean, it is technically it's the fifth year in a row that they're going to be playing in the postseason, and it gives them an opportunity for guys to like Drew Valentine to keep playing. Obviously, this season has been a disappointment on many levels, and I don't know. It just gives them an opportunity to keep playing. They did really well in it last year, made it to the Final Four of the CIT. And it gives them an opportunity to raise a banner and do all that, but ultimately it's kind of, it's kind of, to me, it's not like a cop out or something like that, but it's kind of like it makes you almost wish as to what could have been, especially when you have the tournament over at the Palace, just in your backyard, and you're like, wow, South Dakota State is there, and Oakland wouldn't have ended up playing there since they're hosting it, but you're like, that could have been us.
Right. Yeah. I mean, South Dakota State's going to play Michigan. We'll talk about that later, but I personally, as a student at Oakland, I think it's kind of embarrassing that we're participating in this event. I said the same thing last year when Tim and I were guests on these airwaves with another sports show that was going on, and I just think that for Coach Campy, he's a really well-respected coach, especially around here. And the goal from the beginning is always to make the tournament. And, Tim and I have talked about that before, as expectations for your team or for any team. And going into the season, you expect a Michigan who's rated in the top 5 to go to the Final Four. I mean, for Oakland, it's a little bit different. For Oakland, you want them to make that big tournament, and you don't necessarily expect it, but you hope that they can win a game. And you want them to rely on their star players like Travis Bader and like a grit guy like Drew Valentine, a senior, and you want them to make the tournament. And they didn't do it. So after that, I just think it's kind of a cop-out to take a bid to a tournament like the CIT, which is even less respected than the NIT, and especially 2 years in a row. I think at a certain point, when you're a small school who's trying to make a name for yourself, you need to just cut your losses, and you need to establish that you're not about these little tournaments. You're about making the big one. And yes, will it give them an opportunity to raise a banner? Yes. Will Drew Valentine get to keep playing? Yes. Will Travis Bader get more practices to be the star that he can be next season and lead them back to the real tournament? Yes. However, I just don't think that it's that important, and I just don't think it's worth it for them to risk injuries and risk, just everything, just to play in this tournament versus Youngstown State team, and I don't even know. I mean, there's really not anybody of any importance in it. And if you were to get invited to the NIT, I think that it would be more respectable. I mean, you have teams like North Carolina's been in the NIT before. Kentucky's in the NIT after a bad season for them. Michigan won the NIT one year. Bigger schools participate in that as a compensation prize. However, the CIT isn't even on that level. So I just think that it's really not it's not worth it for the Golden Grizzlies.
Well, like you said, you want Oakland to be able to make a name for themselves, and the way they do that is by playing games. And I don't think it's as much an embarrassment to accept the bid, especially when the NIT, they say it's a weak grouping of schools this year in the big tournament, and then the NIT takes teams that teams like when in a smaller conference, when a regular season champ doesn't win the conference championship, which happens like half the time, then they take that regular season champ. They almost have like qualifying bids of sorts. But then Oakland, they're even on a smaller level, and they're not going to get a chance to play in that NIT. They've never been there, and it's harder for them to make it. So I don't fault them for playing in it. The season is a disappointment, but it gives you a chance to then maybe make something of the season. Like last season, they had a lot of high expectations, and Reggie Hamilton had a great season, and then when it counted, he missed his free throws. And then he was able to have a great set of 3 or 4 games in the CIT, and they set the Summit League record for the most postseason wins, and they were able to have a lot of those at the arena, which was kind of exciting. But I mean, ultimately, it is what it is. And like you said, I'm not embarrassed to say, I'm in the CIT. It is weird. It was really weird last year when the big tournament's going on. You see it on TV, and then it's like, hey, I got to go over to the arena and go see the game, and Oakland's playing Buffalo. And it's just kind of a random game, and it's in March, and it feels weird. So it is, there's a level of strangeness to it, but like I said, I'm not embarrassed to say, Oakland CIT. At the same time, if they win the whole thing, I'm not going to be rocking CIT champs gear or something. And I wouldn't even say, I'm not going to go on Facebook and be like, woo, CIT right. Championship. But if anything, Oakland, besides Valentine, is a very young team. A lot of freshmen and sophomores that get a lot of minutes, or especially on the sophomore level. So it gives them more experience, and technically it is a postseason play. There is some pressure involved. And it gives Campy, more opportunities to go out there and try and win a game. Yeah, I mean, the argument that I could make for it if I wanted to is that it's much like a bowl game that you don't really want. Right. Michigan State goes to the Buffalo Wild Wings Bowl. Yeah,
but people
point, right.
say it gives you the extra practices.
Right.
And in football, I think it's a little bit more relevant than in basketball because basketball, it's not nearly as physical. But, yes, your legs get tired and things like that happen, but it gives you the extra practices before spring practice, and that's what people always say. It doesn't really matter what bowl you go to. It's just you get the extra practices to make yourself better for next year. And, yes, Oakland will get extra practices, and, yes, they'll play an extra game. I don't think it's really relevant. And
well, it's not irrelevant to a point, but I don't think you can fault Oakland as a whole for accepting the bid. If someone offers them to say, hey, here's what, because if anything, if you don't accept anything, then you're not playing at all. You're going to get more exposure, if any, and you're going to get more practice and more. Like I said, I think there's only thing it can only help you than hurt you. I don't think people are going to be like, wow, Oakland took the CIT, wow, because especially when you're at that mid-major level, it's not. Obviously the biggest thing Oakland could do, the greatest thing they could do, is to win the conference tournament, go to the big tournament, be that 12 through 14 seed, pull off a big upset. If you want, even win one game. If you decided to win 2 and all of a sudden people are like, wow, Sweet 16 Oakland, that people would be talking about that for years. They really would. And if you do an a la Davidson or George Mason.
Or Gonzaga.
Then people know who you are.
Right.
And people still talk about George Mason. When you say George Mason or when you say Davidson, people think of Stephon Curry or George Mason going to the Final Four. If Oakland got 2 wins in a row, people would be like, wow, they're not the California school. They're, a school in Michigan. And it's all about that exposure. So if they're not there, they're not going to obviously get that from the CIT. But at a team level, I think it gives Campy an opportunity, especially since the season was such a disappointment. It gives them maybe an opportunity to win a couple games and to get, make those games matter because they've really been a hot and cold team. The 3 teams that were number one teams, the team that's going to play in the Palace on Saturday, they beat. They beat that team. They did that. And they kind of they matched up really well with them. And that's kind of the way it works at a mid-major level. So, if South Dakota State was not in the tournament, if they would have lost one of those games, they're probably headed to, a tournament just like this, CIT. Oakland's biggest rival, that was a bubble team for the tournament last year, and Oral Roberts that left the conference, they're, in this tournament as well.
That's one thing I wanted to point out is that would actually be kind of cool is if you got, it is possible for, if Oakland was to advance to the championship game and Oral Roberts was also, you could have another face-off between those 2 schools,
right.
Former division opponents.
What's kind of funny about the CIT is that they do not have a bracket. It's not, the way it's set up last year was, and I don't even really know. It's like you have a field of teams, they kind of set them up. There's not really even any seeding involved. It's just kind of like you play, and then it's by travel location. That's why Oakland's playing Youngstown State, because they're not that far. They actually flew today They left at 10 a.m. and they got there like before noon. It's not that long of a flight. It's like an hour from here. So if they were to play Oral Roberts, since it's in Tulsa, they would probably both teams would have to advance kind of far in the tournament, if not the semifinals or finals. And it would be very interesting because Oakland and Oral Roberts are probably never going to play again unless they were to meet up in some fashion like this, and they're certainly not going to meet up in the big tournament. So this would be one of the few opportunities ever, going forward. And
that would be cool, and it would give it a little bit more meaning to Golden Grizzly fans and Golden Eagle fans. But, it is what it is, and everybody has their opinion on it, and I just think that you got to hold your program to a higher standard. And
I don't think that Campy doesn't hold his team to a higher standard. You kind of made the point for it, and I understand. I just don't think you can say it's embarrassment when you can say, hey, you get that extra practice. You made those points. It's the same reason those college teams play in those bowls, and they're a cash grab, but they give those smaller teams a chance to play and be on TV and to get get that extra practice, get that bowl win, and then they say it.
But that's not to say for fans of said institution that, like for Spartan fans, I guarantee that they were embarrassed that they went to the Buffalo Wild Wings Bowl. It was a disappointment, and I just think that that's what it is. As a student, that's what I believe, is that it's definitely disappointing for everybody, and it's just kind of embarrassing. I just think that the tournament's the goal, and if you don't make it, then so be it. But it's now next year's the goal, make the tournament. And, that's just what it is. But we're going to move on to a little bit of NHL talk. They recently approved realignment for the upcoming season. Mm-hmm. In this realignment, they're going to change from 6 divisions to just 4. All 16 teams in the Eastern time zone will now be in the Eastern Conference. And there's going to be 16 teams in the East and 14 in the West instead of a 15-15 split. So the teams on the move are going to be Detroit, Columbus, and then the Winnipeg Jets.
Absolutely.
The Jets are going to move from East to the West because the reason they were in the East before is because they were the Thrashers.
They used to be Atlanta, right?
And so when they switched to Winnipeg, they didn't switch conferences. They just changed their name. And then Detroit and Columbus are going from the West to the East. So, like I said, there's going to be 4 divisions, and then the Division C, because the divisions don't technically have names yet within the conference.
Personally, I think they should go back to the old names, like the Norris and the Patrick and Prince of Wales Conference. I think that would be kind of cool.
But the Red Wings are going to be in a conference, a division with Boston, Buffalo, Florida, Montreal, Ottawa, Tampa Bay, and then Toronto. Mm-hmm. So you have Toronto, Detroit, Montreal, and Boston are all original 6 teams, 4 of the 6. And then you have Chicago, who remains in the West, and of all the teams, they kind of got screwed because 5 of the 6 are in the East.
Yeah, but they were. I saw their GM was quoted, their owner was quoted this like a week ago, and he said, we're going to lose arguably their biggest rival in Detroit, which they play, pretty frequently right now, obviously. He said, but is it worth it to then have, you're not going to have Detroit 6-8 times a year, but instead you're going to have everybody at least once a year. You're going to see everybody, and he thinks that's a fair trade-off.
Right, and then the other original 16 would be the Rangers, and they're in the other division within the Eastern Conference.
The Atlantic,
right. And in that division with them is Carolina, Columbus, New Jersey, the other New York team, the Islanders, and then the Philadelphia Flyers and the Penguins.
Right. I'm a big Penguins fan. It's basically you took the Atlantic Division and you added Carolina and Washington, which for television stuff, Washington and Pittsburgh, it's always a big thing, and Washington and New York and Washington. That's kind of a rivalry of sorts, especially with Ovechkin. And then with Carolina, you have they've gone with both Pittsburgh and New York in recent playoff series. And you have the Stahl brothers. One's a former Penguin, and they'll match up with Pittsburgh every year.
Yeah, so, I think it's a good switch, especially for the Red Wings. It's going to keep them in the Eastern time zone. You're not going to have 10:30 starts in L.A. or anywhere else along that West Coast, and like Phoenix or so be it. Yes, you lose a rivalry with Chicago, but you're going to pick one up that has been missing for a while with teams like Toronto and Montreal and New York and Boston. So I think it's a great switch for the Red Wings, and I think it's in due time that Gary Bettman has paid back the Red Wings for the service that they've done for the league.
Well, it definitely for the Red Wings, being in the Eastern Conference, it makes sense that you're not. I mean, they've already done 2 West Coast trips this year, and they're playing games. But the biggest part is for the playoffs when not Oakland, but Detroit wouldn't be headed to San Jose in the first round and playing at 10:30. And I've never really experienced that as a Penguins fan, but I still follow Detroit, especially living up here. I watch a lot of their games and listen to most of them, and I can tell you, that's definitely a big improvement to not have to be up at 1 a.m. watching the third period of a hockey game, and you still might experience that later, obviously, San Jose and Detroit advancing, but as of right now, I think it's great for Detroit because they've been stuck in the West, and I know people complain, and it's kind of unfortunately Detroit is one of the furthest west teams in the East Conference. We're kind of almost on the border there of being that that time zone.
You draw a line pretty much just west of Detroit, and that's the line for the Eastern Western Conference.
And Columbus and Nashville experience the same thing, and I think Nashville is a Eastern Conference or an Eastern time zone team that's going to still be in the West. But
I think they're 1 hour back, like Chicago.
But the thing is those teams if you look at a map, they're further east, and they still have to go with the Red Wings in the West as well. But when this realignment came, I think it definitely pays off. You're absolutely right. Nashville's in the Central Time Zone, but if the way it works out is good for the Red Wings that you can have some games. As a Penguins fan, the Penguins have been here like once since I've lived here.
For a regular season game.
For a regular season game. And I know that was a big thing, when they had the back-to-back finals. And, it gives fans a chance here in Detroit to see everybody. You can see, you're seeing some world-class players, obviously, on the Red Wings roster. It's hard to say. But, having guys having guys like Crosby and Malkin come in, and having a Steven Stamkos come in, and having guys like that, sure, you're treated Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane like every week, basically this season, but seeing everybody is kind of enjoyable for the fans. If I was a season ticket holder, I would definitely be excited about that.
Yeah, I mean, and you reestablish the original 6 rivalries with 4 teams. And I just think it's great that you're gonna bring in Toronto, 4 or 5 times every year.
Right, and that has been a big deal here. I know like teams like Boston, they've never really had anything with a Boston. They've never been in the same division. They've never been in anything like that. But now it's this original 6, and I know that gets really hyped up. But for Toronto, definitely, you have. We're north of Canada,
right? And you're right across.
Absolutely, Windsor,
the border.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
And even the same with Montreal. There's definitely a Canadian-Detroit rivalry.
Right. You
with
go
any of the Canadian
you go to Tigers games in the summer, and there's a lot of Canadian fans there, sporting Tigers hats. But then at the same time, they're big Montreal. There's a huge French Canadian contingent there in Windsor of the Montreal fans.
And even I know Toronto's kind of close to Buffalo, but. If they're not Argonauts fans, some of them go to the Bills,
right, absolutely.
And some of them like the Lions because, like you said, you're right across the border. So it's definitely puts a rivalry because the Canadians love their hockey, and even though they don't necessarily have a lot of baseball teams, just the one, and they don't have NFL teams, they just have CFL teams. They get involved with Detroit sports as often as they can, but when it comes to hockey, you want to beat them. So. It creates like a playoff atmosphere at the Jill.
As a Penguins fan, sure they've already been in the East, and it doesn't really affect them as much because they're already they're basically in the same division. But you add a team in Washington that whenever they play, Crosby, Ovechkin, they hype that up on television. They've had a couple playoff series, and the Penguins, to their credit, have usually gotten the better of them. But now you set that up, and you'll set that up for years. Both Crosby and Ovechkin are like on 10-year deals or whatever. They'll be playing each other for a long time.
Right, and in the Western Conference, I'm not the biggest hockey guy in the world, but you have names in that Eastern Conference. Even Rick Nash recently went to the Eastern Conference. You have Crosby, you have Malkin, you have Ovechkin, you have Steven Stamkos. Just names there that you don't really have in the West. And
I people up here, they say this is hockey town and all that, and I don't fully believe that. But the whole original six thing, while it is hyped up around here, it's good that at least they'll stop complaining about it and they'll get to play, because they do deserve that, as opposed to playing Nashville all the time. And I understand if you were to ask fans that are 18 or 20 years old who they consider are more of a rival, they're probably going to say Nashville over a Boston Bruins team or something, because they've been playing Nashville more. You've had playoff series.
I think they'd say Pittsburgh.
Well, no, but I'm saying I'm saying an original
comparing
16. If you said, hey, how about the? No, I understand, like Montreal, Toronto, obviously with the Canadian connection.
I mean, if you're young enough, you might not even know what
Chicago,
the original
exactly,
is.
But Chicago. But if you said, hey, who do you consider more of a rival? The New York Rangers or the Nashville Predators or the the Boston Bruins or even like the St. Louis Blues, and people probably Minnesota Wild, a team that's only existed for like 10 years, but because you played them so often, because you have those playoff series with them, especially like a team like Nashville that's only been in existence for like 15 years. There's more of a rivalry there. And you're going to rip that up and start it with this original six, but a lot of the fan base, of the older fan base up here, is definitely going to appreciate that. I think you're going to see ticket sales go up. I think you're going to see, you're going to see the Joe packed for matchups like that, as opposed to constantly shoving, Nashville and St. Louis and Minnesota down fans' throats.
Hockey tonky died a little bit, but
and I understand that, but like I said, I think overall they did it right. Now, and I know we both kind of agree on this, if I were in charge of the NHL, I would cut it down to like 24 teams.
Right.
You would get rid of like 6, and you'd move a couple back to Canada in general. You would give teams back, and you could even put a second team in Toronto. You really could do that. Enough with the Phoenix and it's
Dallas.
Funny. What's funny is when we look at this realignment, if the NHL put out a map that shows it, and you have 4 divisions, and you kind of have the far west, and it was one color, and then you kind of have the mountain region kind of thing, and you have the Colorado and stuff in there, and it goes up into Canada as well, obviously, and then you kind of had, and it stretched to Chicago, and then you had the division the Red Wings were in, and it kind of did this thing where it kind of swept up and into Canada up north, and it kind of cut up, but then the Penguins division is the Atlantic, and it's really centralized in that like northeast area, not too far, but Pittsburgh and Philly and New York kind of makes like a little triangle, and all the teams are like in there, because you have New Jersey, New York, Islanders. That's 3 of the 6 or 8 right there, and then the Penguins kind of dips down onto the coast, so it kind of cuts that middle out, and then the Red Wings division was also colored in on Florida, right? It's kind of like Florida teams were just kind of a throw-in. And that's it. I would, get rid of those teams.
Right.
Just
cut out that portion of the country.
I understand that, there's fans there to a point, but I think your talent pool would be a lot better if you cut it down to 24. But unfortunately, the biggest problem I have with this is the uneven numbers. I'm not a big fan of that. I've never been like baseball when you had in baseball up until now. The NL Central had 6 teams, and if you were in the NL West, you only had 4, and it's like that's a big advantage. You have 2 less teams to beat.
Right.
And I understand the quality of teams for a long time has been better in the West than like Dodgers and Giants than Reds and Pirates. But if you're the Brewers, you're like, man, we got to beat 2 more teams than the Dodgers do.
Just a mediocre team.
But what's going to happen is Bettman is probably going to look to expand. They're gonna put like 2 more teams in, and then it would even it out. So you're going to have like 32, just like the NFL, and I think it might weaken the product more than helping.
Right. And I think for the Red Wings too, when you go to the East, it's definitely a different style of play. It's more physical, where the Red Wings have for a long time just said, we're going to beat you with skill. They don't have a enforcer. I mean, now Jordan Tutu is a little bit of that style of player, but there's been rumors this week about Pavel Datsyuk and his return to Russia after next season, the 2014 season. This would be devastating to the Red Wings for him to just up and leave after his contract's up. So he signed through the 2014 season, like I said, and there's been a lot of things that's saying that once his contract's up, he is going to go back to his home country of Russia, and he's going to play in the KHL. and he wants to put on a show when he still can. When he's, I think he turns 34, 35, something like that, within the next year, and so he wants to put on a show for his home fans of sorts in Russia while he's still young enough to do it.
Well, and unfortunately, with Czech players, Slovakians, and Russians, this is kind of a common thing where you look at even a guy like Sergei Fedorov up till like 2 years ago, he was still playing in the KHL. A guy like Jaromir Jagr, who was a superstar with the Penguins and Capitals and Rangers, he just left and he went to the KHL. And what they're able to do is they're able to offer, they don't have caps. There's like no tax. They can give them euros. Everything's like kind of in their advantage. And sure, it's not the highest competition, but they speak their native language. They play and
it's like a rec league,
right? And ultimately, Jagr, he came back at like 40 something. He played with Philly. Now he's with Dallas. But it's not uncommon. Players do this, even younger guys. And Datsyuk would be more of a headliner, and especially obviously here in Detroit. But even a guy like Hudler did this. He went to the KHL, and it's hard to compete with that when you have a capped cap. And sure, most players want the highest competition of the NHL, and they went some team when Malkin was a free agent, they were offering him just like a ridiculous number that was like more than the entire Penguin salary cap, like some oil billionaire in Russia. But Malkin decided to stay in Pittsburgh and stay in the NHL. There's a draw because it's hard for us to understand as Americans and in American leagues. The NHL is, we were talking about this the other day, is by far the most diverse league in terms of different countries having athletes represented. Football is almost exclusively American outside of like OCU and Euro. And then baseball, you have a lot of guys from, Mexico and South America and stuff, but you're not bringing in a lot of Europeans. And then basketball, every roster has like one or two like Jonas Jerebkos, Viktor Kravtsov, like white Europeans, and unfortunately they're one of the few white players. But
or Dirk or
you can kind of like Steve Nash is a Canadian. There's not a whole lot of Canadians or Russians involved. Or I'm sorry, there are not as many non-Americans in the NBA.
Right.
That's why we go to the gold medal, and basically all we have to worry about is Spain. The Gasol brothers are the only people standing our way. But baseball, we saw that. The World Baseball Classic, America doesn't do as well. And hockey, for sure, Canada's a powerhouse, Russia's a powerhouse, the United States is there, but Canada's obviously better. I mean, you look at rosters, and you can compare it to that basketball where you have those one or two non-Americans. In hockey, you have like one or two Americans.
Right.
Especially, the Red Wings have built their teams this way, and it's not a knock on them, but, they have the Swedish guys, and they've got Russian guys. And
Lidstrom wasn't American. Yzerman wasn't American.
I mean, that's the thing. So it would be a huge blow to the Red Wings. And we were talking about this before. If I was the Red Wings, and if I knew for sure that he was going to do this, I would trade him this year.
Yeah, I mean, the question is, do you trade him or do you keep him? And I mean, yes, you don't know for sure, especially as fans. I have a feeling that Ken Holland has been in conversation with Pavel, but if it's true that he's going to leave, I think you trade him to a contender that's going to want him just as that rent-a player for, if you do it this year for a year and a half to make 2 different cup runs, or you do it next year if you can't do it this year. If he's still unsure, I don't know. You make him give you an answer by next year's trade deadline, and then you deal him and you say, listen, go make a run for the cup with, I don't know, somebody like Philadelphia or somebody who has the space.
Say it. Say it.
Or Pittsburgh.
That would be, oh my goodness. It would be the greatest thing to ever happen. A power play with Crosby, Malkin, Datsyuk. Oh my goodness. It would just be...
Tim's out of the studio, folks.
Not saying I haven't done this in NHL 13, but that would be fantastic.
Right. But I mean, Pavel's a great player, and he means a lot to the Wings. And I mean, it'd be a hard thing to see, or sorry, it'd be hard for the fans to see him go. But in the end, he's not going to do anything for you in the KHL.
Right.
So
and you
if
should
you can get something for him,
you look at the
do
Wings
it.
right now. They're kind of in a state of rebuilding at the moment. They're not fully there, but there's a lot of young guys on the team. They're kind of in a state of they're not really contenders right now. You can say that
today,
confidently.
Today they're the 6th seed in the West.
There's a good chance that they make the playoffs, and sure, then anything can happen. But right now, people aren't saying, hey, they're one of the best. They're probably not even like in the top 10 of a lot of people's, NHL teams, and that's just the way it is. They're kind of a mid-range team.
Every team goes through it, and the Red Wings have finally hit that.
And you've gone to the playoffs 20 straight years, so it's bound to happen.
If you keep that streak alive, and if you can. Odds are it's not going to go on forever, Shocking, I know. Right. But, it is what it is. And if Pavel's going to leave, then you need to get something for him and get as much as you can and rebuild your team for the future. But we're gonna go to our break right now. Pretty good dissection right there of the Wings and Oakland basketball. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about March Madness. We're pretty excited about it, so tune in.